don't just watch subscribe. Because the story you're about to hear is darker than the night outside your window. And once it begins, you'll never forget it. The rain had not stopped for 3 days in the small town of Ashbury, a place where people still left their doors unlocked and neighbors called each other by first names. On the fourth night, just after 11 p.m., police dispatch lit up with frantic calls. Residents claimed a small boy had been knocking on doors along Maple Street. He was described as no more than 10 years old, with pale skin, drenched clothes, and an unsettling silence. He would knock, step back, and simply stare. When people asked his name, he said nothing. When they tried to bring him inside, he turned and vanished into the rain. What shook the community wasn't just the boy's strange behavior. It was the fact that everyone swore he looked exactly like Thomas Blake, the same Thomas whose funeral they had attended 5 days earlier. Detective Marla Jensen was first on scene. She had been at the funeral herself, standing in the back pew as the casket closed on a boy she had once given rides home after school. She drove to Maple Street with her wipers beating against the glass, her gut already tight with unease. At number 42, the porch was wet with small footprints. The homeowner, Mrs. Cunningham, swore she had opened the door and seen Thomas standing there, rain dripping from his hair, lips trembling. He didn't speak, she said, clutching her robe tighter. But his eyes, they weren't the eyes of a child anymore. They looked tired, older. Detective Jensen crouched down, examining the prints. Small, bare feet. They led from the road to the porch, but stopped cold at the welcome mat. No return path. No trace of where he had gone. By morning, 3 more houses reported the same. Each time, Thomas knocked. Each time he said nothing. Each time he did. Eyes appeared before police arrived. The town buzzed with whispers. Was it a cruel prank? A hallucination? Or something worse? Someone using the tragedy to terrorize grieving neighbors? At the station, Jensen ordered Thomas's autopsy report again. She read every page, every line, looking for cracks. Official cause, drowning in the quarry. But the details didn't sit right. The lungs were filled with water, yes, but the timeline was unclear. No clear marks of how he fell. No witness had seen him go under. She circled a sentence in red. Time of death estimated between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. On the evening of his death, several people had seen Thomas riding his bike around town past 7 p.m. The police report logged his last confirmed sighting at 7:40. His body had been pulled from the quarry at 8:15. But something about the window, something about the missing 30 minutes, burned in Jensen's mind. That night, Maple Street filled with officers. They watched, waited. And at exactly 11:12, footsteps splashed on the pavement. Small, light, purposeful. The boy emerged from the shadows, head down, shirt clinging to his frame. He climbed each porch step and knocked. 3 times, steady, cold. Every officer froze. Their radios hissed static. Their flashlights cut through the rain. But when the beams landed on him, he looked just like the photos. The same round face, the same unruly hair. Jensen whispered, "Thomas." But the boy didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't breathe. And then he turned, walked toward the old Blake residence, and slipped through the front door without opening it. The house had been locked since the funeral. The family had left town to escape the grief. When officers pried the door open minutes later, the house was empty. Only the faint sound of dripping water echoed from upstairs. Detective Jensen led the way. Her gun drawn, though she knew no weapon would matter here. She reached Thomas's bedroom. The wallpaper peeled with dampness. Toys sat untouched. And then she saw it on the window pane, traced in condensation as though by a child's finger.
"Why didn't you save me?" Her breath caught in her throat. But when she spun back toward the hallway, every single officer behind her was staring in shock. The wet sound of footsteps had begun again, this time from the locked basement below. All right, here comes Chapter 2 of The Child Who Knocked on Doors After His Funeral. The basement door was painted shut from years of neglect, its edges sealed with dust. No one had set foot down there in at least a decade. Yet from behind it came the unmistakable sound of bare feet slapping against concrete, slow and deliberate, as if someone were waiting for them to open it. Detective Jensen steadied her breathing. She gave the order. 2 officers pried the door loose, the old wood groaning as it splintered. The air that drifted out was damp and metallic, carrying the sour tang of standing water and rusted pipes. Flashlights cut through the darkness. The stairs descended into shadow, and again came that sound footsteps. This time, faster. "Running! Police!" Jensen shouted, but the only reply was the echo of retreating steps. They charged downward. Their beams danced across cracked walls and half-flooded cement, and there, in the corner, stood a small red bicycle, its frame still wet, as if it had just been dragged from the quarry. The officers froze. That bike had been buried with Thomas. The investigation turned violent with questions. The town coroner swore the burial had been completed. The parents had watched the coffin lowered, the dirt packed tight. How could the boy's belongings appear in a basement locked for years? Jensen pressed deeper, retracing Thomas's final day. She spoke to his best friend Daniel, who admitted they had been at the quarry together. "He wanted to show me something," Daniel whispered, his eyes darting away. "Something he found in his dad's shed." What was it? A box. Old, heavy. He said it was full of secrets, but basement. By the time backup arrived, the boy was gone. But wet handprints smeared the glass, impossibly real. Jensen gathered her team. They returned to the Blake house, to the hatch in the basement wall. This time they carried stronger lights, weapons drawn, nerves on edge. The tunnel yawned open, swallowing their beams. Roots hung from the ceiling like claws. Water dripped steadily, echoing like a heartbeat. They followed it 30 yards in, 50, 100, until finally the tunnel widened into a crude chamber, and there in the dirt lay wooden boxes, small, roughly built, each one barely large enough to hold a child. Some were broken open, empty, others were nailed shut. Jensen's hand shook as she reached for the nearest lid. She pried it open. Inside was not a body but stacks of old photographs. Children from the town, dating back decades. Smiling faces, missing posters. Evidence no one had ever seen. But then an officer's light fell on another box at the far end. This one wasn't dusty. It was new. Fresh nails gleamed in the beam. Scratched across the top in childish scrawl was a single name. Daniel. Got it. Here's the final chapter of The Child Who Knocked on Doors After His Funeral. The chamber fell into silence. The officers stood frozen, their flashlights trembling across the fresh box with Daniel's name carved into its lid. Detective Jensen felt her heart slam in her chest. The boy who had confided in her just days ago, the boy who was Thomas's closest friend, was now marked as if someone had planned to take him next. "Get this open," she ordered. Her voice cracked, but the command was sharp. A crowbar splintered the lid. Inside, there was no body, just a single object, Thomas's soaked blue jacket folded neatly, and underneath it, a cassette tape in a cracked plastic case. The chamber's damp air thickened as Jensen slid the tape into a recorder they'd brought. The confession broke like glass. The jealous sibling, hidden in shadows, had tried to frame Thomas's discovery as an accident. He had dragged the body into the quarry, hoping the water would wash away the truth, but the truth had a way of returning. The arrest was swift, the evidence undeniable. Yet as the boy's brother was led away in cuffs, Daniel stared out into the storm. "He's still here, isn't he?" he asked softly. Jensen didn't answer, because she knew he was right. 2 weeks later, after the trial began, the Blake house was condemned and sealed. No one dared go inside. But one night, as demolition crews prepared their machines, a neighbor across the street woke to 3 sharp knocks on her door. When she opened it, rain swept across her porch. No one stood there. Only the faint outline of small, wet footprints led to her welcome mat and stopped. On her window, written in condensation, was the same haunting message Detective Jensen had seen that first night. "Why didn't you save me?" Ashbury would never forget the child who knocked after his funeral. Some said it was grief, others said it was guilt. But for those who heard those knocks with their own ears, they knew it was something else. A warning, a reminder, a debt that could never be repaid. If you think this story chilled you to the bone, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe because the darkness is only just beginning. End of story.